Hello everyone, welcome to my course on designing a professional fashion collection. Today we'll talk about the creative research process followed by fashion designers around the world and how do they find the source of their inspiration. Let's begin by understanding what is inspiration. It is an involuntary action which occurs in the brain as a reaction to internal as well as external stimuli. For example, an image, a song, a video, memories, or something else, allowing you to come up with new ideas, methods, solutions, or perspectives. There are two parts of the brain which are majorly responsible for inspiration, the neocortex and the thalamus. And for an artist to design something, it's extremely important to define his source of inspiration, or as we say in the fashion world, the muse. Now let's not forget that fashion design, just like any other industry, is extremely competitive. Hence, merely finding the source of inspiration is not enough. In today's world, designers must work on certain stimuli or sources which can help them develop a competitive edge over other designers. So, in a nutshell, what I want to say is that your source of inspiration is basically a stimulus, and when this source of inspiration, this image or this sound or whatever it might be, reaches the thalamus and the neocortex, these two glands, they generate ideas in your mind. So the stronger the stimulus, the stronger the idea. Weaker the stimulus, weaker the idea. Let me explain this with the help of an example. As I said that the source of inspiration is the stimulus which affects the idea in your mind. So it is quite possible that the same stimulus might generate different ideas in different minds. So, for example, if we take architecture as a stimulus or as a source of inspiration, we will see that different designers, existing designers like Rei Kawakubo, Martin Margiela, Hussein Chalayan, when they are inspired by architecture, they are inspired by different aspects of architecture, different characteristics, different uses. They do not interpret their source in the same exact way. Let me explain this with the help of an example. For example, Rei Kawakubo tries to find parallels between the framing of a building and framing of clothing, and his clothes interpret the importance of framing while developing clothes. Ray says that fashion could have the same ability to frame and deform your public appearance and your personal sense of comfort that architecture long claimed. So basically, Ray says that the way architecture provides shape to a building, clothes provide shape to your body. Mahta Margiela, so Ray is focusing on the structural aspect of architecture. Mahta Margiela focuses on the protective aspect of architecture. He says that both architecture and fashion protect the human skin. For example, clothes protect you from cold weather, hot weather, rains. Similarly, just like your building or your home protects you from extreme temperatures and provide you a comfortable environment. And we have yet another designer, Hussein Chalayan, who focuses on the transformative aspect of architecture. He says, I don't really refer to specific architecture. It's more the theory of space, place, dimensions of the body, materials, etc. So he tries to link transformative aspect of clothing with the transformative aspect of architecture. Chalayan is a designer in the alternative domain, alternative fashion. So for one of his collections, inspired by his childhood memories, Chalayan designed pieces which can be used as furniture, and in the event of a war or natural calamity, people can flee, taking with them these furniture pieces and wear them as clothing. So his interpretation of furniture is completely different from Ray and Martha Margiela. Now, when you're trying to design something, keeping in view your competitors' strategies, you have to be creative and think outside the box. And in order to do so, it's not possible to simply look at an object. We have to go a step further. So now we will look at some methods or exercises which different designers use in order to find their unique inspiration. I would like to put up a disclaimer here though. The following research methods are simply a list of common practices that people use around the globe. Please keep in mind that these practices are in no way developed or regulated by any public or private enterprise. They have been listed only for references and should ideally be used as a reference. As students or designers, I highly advise you to experiment and come up with your own techniques and to not restrict yourself to the following methods. This is not the objective of this exercise. So, the first technique is volume research. The images that you see in this slide belong to a project which I made when I was in school. For this project, I wanted to experiment with curved lines, shapes, and structures. So for my research, the first was consisted of secondary sources. The first step was consisted of secondary sources, that is, pieces already created by other designers. Here I simply took pictures from different runways and marked the specific details which inspired me. The second step consisted of primary research, which means conducting one's own experiments. I bought a vintage jacket from the flea market. I deconstructed it, played around with the construction at the shoulders, with the drapes, modified the silhouettes a little bit, and I developed two different styles. For the first style, I took a vintage jacket, deconstructed its shoulders, and created an angular, futuristic look, and associated adjectives which described the mood. In this case, confidence, panache, dominance. These keywords, they help you to perceive this design as how I want you to perceive it. By adding keywords to your mood board or to your inspiration board, you are essentially guiding your client's eyes towards the direction in which you want them to. For the second style, I made a softer, more draped shoulder followed by the mood description. I see it as outgoing, laid back, trendy. The next technique is cutouts and windows. This is one of the most common techniques which you must have also seen a lot on Pinterest and Facebook. Ideally, a designer would draw the overall silhouette of the mannequin and cut out the insides like a stencil. Then the stencil is placed on different color combinations, fabrics, textures, etc. to come up with interesting combinations. This can also be achieved through Photoshop by using the layers and masking technique. Now we will look at draping with images. I developed this technique myself. For a personal project, I was inspired by the Parisian libraries like the BNF, Pantheon Sorbonne, etc. So I printed out the images of the architecture on A4 size sheets and draped these images on small mannequins to obtain my silhouettes. Next technique is interchanging different parts of the garment. This technique has been used and abused by a lot of designers, and it almost works like a charm when you are trying to diversify your collection. This is a more technical method and would require a minimum understanding of garment construction. However, it is really effective when stuck in the creative process. Basically, you experiment with the pattern of a classic garment, for example, a jacket, and change different parts of the garment as for example using the sleeve pattern in the place of the lapel, or using the collar pattern as a belt in the skirt. This technique helps to push the envelope and create unthinkable silhouettes. In order to save time and energy, you can first experiment with silhouettes on computer, shortlist your preferred results, and then realize them on paper. In this image, I have scaled down a tulle skirt to use it as sleeves for a crop top. Let's take another example. In this image, I have taken an 18th century corset. Here I detached the leg of mutton sleeves and joined them together to obtain Jodhpur pants, which are inspired by the hunting pants from worn by Indian kings. Now I can modify the pattern and construct pants using this silhouette as the base. I can also use the shell of the corset to transform it into a sleeveless man's vest or discard it completely. Moving on, another technique which is very famous and extremely creative is surface exploration. Surface basically refers to the surface of a fabric or some material. In this technique, we experiment by manipulating the surface of different fabrics. This can be done by ripping geometrical shapes in the fabric, embroidery, using the applique technique to sew a motif or lace on silk, for example, beading, using top stitching to create checkered patterns, or any other method which interests you. Next technique is optical illusion. In the art world, this technique is also called op art or optical art. This is a technique mostly used by graphic designers to create visually compelling art. If you're strong with Photoshop, Illustrator, or even PowerPoint, you can use this technique to develop interesting prints and patterns. For a personal project, I was inspired by the work of Paul Peterson, an optical artist who works with creative agencies. On the left, you will see artworks created by Paul Peterson for different agencies. And using this artwork as inspiration, on the right, I have created my own op art called Le Mourir de Lumière. Using the sundial visual, I created my own prints on Photoshop. Some applications which can be used for creating such art are called Modo and GeoEditor. The next technique is applying object silhouettes as a clothing. This is an extremely innovative technique I learned when I was in fashion school. This technique was developed by fashion designer Henri Alage. What we do is basically we begin by choosing a random object of choice. It can be a piece of furniture, a lampshade, a chair, or it can be a smaller object like a perfume bottle. You design a cover or a silhouette of this object in a muslin fabric. We proceed by scaling up the silhouette for a human body while maintaining the proportions, and then draping the silhouette on a dummy. Essentially, we are replicating the body of the object in fabric and draping it on a human form. It helps you to come up with interesting silhouettes and shapes when you're trying to design extraordinary or futuristic looks. This is a really effective technique, however, it generally results in more conceptual and artistic silhouettes, which cannot be easily commercialized. This technique has been developed originally by Henri Alage, who is a more conceptual fashion designer. Now I will quickly go through some other techniques which you can use to develop your own experiments. You can experiment with op art to develop prints and then use cutouts to see how to place these prints on your silhouettes. You can also conduct volume research to obtain shoulder or collar details and then change them as interchangeable parts to find new silhouettes. Another technique can be adding limitations. For example, work using only straight lines, or only curves, or no curves at all, or only using pleats to draft all the patterns, shirts, jackets, dresses, etc. By adding limitations, you can also achieve results which might have been otherwise skipped or overlooked. Another interesting way is working only with those elements which you find uninspiring. This concept works along the lines of reverse psychology. For example, working with a specific color or a specific fabric, using a technique which you do like, and you never know, you might just develop some extraordinary pieces. Next technique is called object word association. We first begin by identifying the problem to be solved or the objective to be achieved. For example, designing a collection of tulle skirts can be an objective. We will then choose a random object. You can do this by preparing lots or rapid fire answering if you're working with a partner. Let's say, for example, the choice of object is a suitcase. We then make a long list of adjectives or nouns to describe different characteristics of suitcase. For example, black, wide, plastic, rough textured, zipper, drag, wheel, resistant, lock, heavy, etc. Then we select two or more words and associate these words with the problem to be solved. In our example, we can say designing a collection of tulle skirts with a black, rough textured using plastic zippers. This might help you to look for black and rough textured tulle. Another fun technique is playing with traditional codes. For example, military prints are traditionally green, black, or brown, and church robes are either white, red, purple, and black. You can experiment by exchanging the colors of these two garments, thereby obtaining purple and red camouflage print and a green and white church robe. These silhouettes can then be used to design the final collection. I hope these techniques were informative and would help you all to design your own collections. Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on developing the mood board. Let's begin by understanding why we actually need a mood board. In today's world, a designer cannot work by himself. He has different people and teams working together to realize his vision. For example, the design team consisting of interns, assistant designers, and pattern makers. The communications team working on the social media management, generating content to be posted on different platforms. Sending newsletters to customers. The marketing team working on creating ads and visuals to be published across platforms. The PR team trying to develop collaborations with celebrities and stylists, influencers to spread the word about the designer and his collection. And on the consumer's end, the wholesalers and retailers need to understand the designer's vision to be able to sell his or her collection in their own stores. Hence, mood board, inspiration board, and trend boards are the sources of material and content for all these different teams, which help them share a common vision of the project, and it helps avoid noise and miscommunication between them. No matter what is the size of your brand, there are two boards which are always prepared when designing a collection. The approach might be different for each brand, but this step is never skipped. Read the first para as is. Mood board creates a general mood or an overall ambience of the collection, but these elements are not always incorporated into the final clothes. The inspiration board consists of elements which go directly into the collection and are integrated in the final pieces. Together, the mood and the inspiration board make up the storyboard. For example, if you're inspired by floral gardens, your mood board will be comprised of images of sunflowers and leaves or carefully trimmed bushes. But when you will do your creative research and obtain the results, for example, you conduct an X ray of flowers to obtain interesting patterns and prints for your shirts. Another way to explain this concept is this. The mood board is the vision which you provide to your team, and the inspiration board consists of your team's interpretation of your vision. You can then come in and validate parts of the inspiration board which you find cohesive and in line with your vision. Let's now look at the elements of the mood board. The elements are easily derivable depending on the information needs of the teams working with you. There is some information which is required by all the partners, such as inspiration sources, while other information is more specific. For example, the choice of keywords to be used as hashtags on social media, or the choice of research techniques to be explored by the pattern makers. I would again like to specify that the classification which I am providing is an ideal situation. In real life, depending on the business model and strategies of different brands, some choose to exclude certain elements while others might add additional elements not listed here. So, the elements might include the source or sources of inspiration, images of landscapes, objects, quotes, phrases, or songs which inspired the collection, images of competitor brands and products, the collection codes for the collection, specifying the small garment details so the assistants can develop options for the collection. Your customers may or may not be part of your audience depending on your communication and marketing strategy and how lenient you are with the privacy of your storyboards. The specific elements of the inspiration board would then also depend on the teams you're working with. The different elements provided by all these teams would include the study pieces and research techniques conducted, illustrations and croquis, common elements of the collection, fabric samples, embroidery and lace samples, trend research, technical drawings, keywords, etc. Now let's look at some examples of mood boards, including some personal examples. Here you see a mini collection of 5 pieces. I made a mini collection of 5 pieces inspired by the winter season and the beautiful natural effects and textures created by the snow on the trees. Plus, I had also included a limitation that I need to work with stripes no matter what. So I developed this mood board with images of frozen dew, frost, snow on the ground, the glitter effect when the sunlight hits the snow, the visible striped patterns on frozen leaves. From this mood board, I extracted the color card, as you can see on the right. The creative research included the creative research which I did for this project included draping and pleating shown as such on the left and followed by illustration options on the right. So the color card, draping pictures, illustrations together make up the inspiration board in this example because we can see concretely how and which exact and specific elements of the inspiration went into the final garment. Let's look at another one. For this next project, my inspiration came from the concept of energy. I called it Stuck in a Limbo. The keywords which defined this collection were initiation, intensity, energy, space, kinetic, depth, and force. And on the right, you can see the final mood board, which is evidently quite coherent with the keywords which I have used. I would like to mention here that all the images that I have used in the mood board are just present to communicate space or energy or intensity. None of these images went directly into the collection or the final pieces. Hence, this collection of images is called a mood board as it gives a general vibe or mood of the collection. From the mood board, I then extracted the color card and the possible fabric compositions I wanted to work with. As you might have seen in a previous lecture, I conducted the secondary volume research of collars, sleeves, hems, and shoulders from the designs already existing on the runway. And the primary research experimentation with the construction of the shoulders using shoulder pads. This was followed by the technical drawing of the jacket and the illustration. In real life, when boards are created for commercial collections, they're much more detailed, with every little detail integrated onto the inspiration board. To get more examples of mood board and inspiration boards, I invite you to explore Pinterest. In the next lesson, we will look at how to ensure that your collections are commercial and communicate a cohesive story.